Hi, so this is Anthony Hamilton. We had our normal Saturday session yesterday on May 4th, and I think it was a very fruitful discussion. And unfortunately, I had a problem with the recording, so the great feedback and the back and forth question and answer session that we had was lost. My bad for that. But I thought I would try and recover from my memory some of the points that we discussed because I think it was a very important session, and it was basically a summary of some of the principles of quantum consciousness that I cover in my book, Mind, Time, and Power. The idea then is that each of us operates from a model of the world. And that model is unique because we construct our model over time based on the experiences we have and the way we interpret the experiences and the meanings that we attach to them and the feelings and emotions that get triggered by these various thoughts and memories and feelings that we have. So the bottom line then is that each of us operates from a unique model of the world. And what quantum consciousness is a new way of looking at the mind and the world and the interaction between our thoughts and our personal reality. So there's a little bit of quantum physics and a little bit of philosophy of mind, a little bit of neuro-linguistic programming, and a little bit of Buddhism, all wrapped up in this new model that I detail in my book and which science has now recognized. So the term quantum consciousness is not a term that I came up with, but it's one that I use because it's a way of understanding our mind and our thinking and the interaction between the world of physical reality and the non-physical world of our imagination that exists inside each of us. So these are some of the principles of quantum consciousness that I cover in my book. The first one is that your thoughts can become physically real. Now, this is a mind-blowing statement to a lot of people, and it was certainly a mind-blowing statement to me when I first came across it many years ago. When I started and when I grew up in my teens and early 20s, I was as confused as any other teenager trying to figure out how the world worked. And specifically, I had an experience when I was 10 that is normally called a precognitive dream, where I saw my future in advance at the age of 32. And as I got into my mid-20s and late 20s, I became more and more confused about how that dream could be real, because it seemed to me that the information I got in that dream was accurate. And as I got into my late 20s and early 30s, some of the ideas and some of the things that I saw in that dream were starting to come true. So I became more and more convinced that the dream was real. It was a real connection between myself at the age of 10 and myself at the age of 32. And I asked myself, how is it possible to get information from the future? Because that's what I thought happened to me. So I spent many years reading about the mind and consciousness and eventually physics and some of the principles of Albert Einstein, who gave us a whole new way of looking at the physical world and the four-dimensional space-time continuum that we all live in. We used to think that the world was 3 dimensions, but since Einstein came along over 100 years ago now, we recognize that we live in a 4-dimensional matrix, where time is one of the dimensions. And one of the statements that I heard attributed to Albert Einstein is the idea that the laws of time and the laws of space are mirror images of each other. So in other words, we don't live in a 3-dimensional physical world. which is the world that Newtonian mechanics described. We live in a four-dimensional world consisting of the three dimensions of space and the fourth dimension of time. So time is considered a dimension just like the field of space. So the idea then that time is a field is one of these principles that I detail in my book, Mind, Time, and Power. Another principle is the idea that your thoughts can become physically real. Now, at first, this can seem like a mind-boggling statement, and yet if you think about it, you're making your thoughts become real every single day of your life. If you decide to go to the store and buy a loaf of bread, you might get a picture in your mind of yourself going to the store and buying a loaf of bread. You decide to do that, and so you walk to the store, you buy a loaf of bread, you come home, and now you have your bread. So in a sense, you have changed your physical world, your reality, your home, because now there's bread in it, and before there was no bread in it. So your thought, I'll go to the store and buy some bread, that has changed your physical world. Now, we don't normally think of our daily activities this way, and yet if we do think about them, then of course we realize that anybody who accomplishes something unique, for example, an architect designing a building and having a building built from his designs, that building is a physical thing. It involves perhaps millions of dollars and hundreds of people working together to build the building, and yet it all started from a thought, from an idea in the architect's mind. So there's another example of how a thought can become real. And of course, an architect spends many years learning how to turn his thoughts into physical plans and drawings, and then gives those drawings to a builder who puts the money together, buys the property, buys the materials, builds the building, and eventually that building becomes a physical thing that you can live in. And it all started with an idea in the architect's mind. So this, in fact, is what a goal is. Because when you have a goal of buying a loaf of bread, or you have a goal of buying a new car, or you have a goal of taking a trip to a warm climate in the wintertime, that goal represents a possible physical reality. In other words, it is an image of the future that could be real for you. So the idea that your thoughts can become physically real, or that your thoughts do become physically real, is one of the fundamental principles then of this new self-affirming concept called quantum consciousness. And the second then is the idea that time is a field. So in other words, when I had that dream at the age of 10, I saw myself at the age of 32. Now, by the time I got to be around 30 years old, I had been reading about physics and consciousness and the mind, studying hypnosis and meditation and these kind of things for nearly 20 years. And one of the things that I was studying was called Silva Mind Control. It was a course that I took. And in that course, I learned to visualize. In other words, I learned to just form a habit of closing my eyes and visualizing my goals and working towards my goals, forming plans to achieve my goals, the same as an architect would design and form plans to build his building. And I became very good at achieving some very positive goals that were important to me. So this idea then of thinking of a goal, visualizing a goal, using that possible future as a way to interact with and to come up with plans, asking yourself questions like, what is this worth to me if I were to achieve this? Or what would I need to achieve this goal? You can interact with that future that hasn't happened yet, and you can use your mind to get information, to form a plan, to move towards the achievement of that goal. So a goal then, to me, is a possible future that I can experience if I crystallize my thinking, develop my plans, and work towards it. So this is principle number 10. A goal is a possible future reality that I can connect with now. I can think about that. And when I think about it, there's a kind of a connection formed. Now, this was an idea that I eventually realized when I was doing my creative visualization exercise at the age of 32. I remembered having that dream. And I thought to myself, I'm more or less living the life now that I saw in that dream. At the time, I was working as an advertising copywriter. I was making my living as a writer. I had also started teaching creative visualization courses at night school, and I had been teaching classes in goal setting and creative visualization and achieving your goals. And some of my students were getting great results, the same as I was getting great results, achieving my goals, losing weight, quitting smoking, getting a new job as a copywriter, making a living as a writer, which were the things that I saw in my dream at the age of 10. So this idea then that the dream that I could experience at the age of 10 and at the age of 32, remembering having that dream, I realized that memory is not a recording that existed in my brain somewhere, but it was a connection through time where at the age of 32, I was connected to my 10-year-old self, and I could remember what I was doing at the age of 10, and I could remember having that dream. So suddenly then, this concept of the memory as a connection, and in fact, all thinking as a connection, answered the first question that I asked myself when I had that dream, which was, how is it possible to get information from the future? And I realized that if memory is a connection, then it's perfectly understandable that the information could go back and forth between my 32-year-old self and myself at the age of 10. Just the same as I can make a phone call to a friend of mine on the other side of town or the other side of the country, and information goes back and forth between our two telephones. Just like Albert Einstein said, the laws of time and the laws of space are mirror images of each other. So if information is passing through space when I make a phone call, why not have information passing through time when I set a goal? Or when I have a dream of myself at the age of 10, I see myself at the age of 32. Or if I see myself walking to the store and buying a loaf of bread and bringing that bread home, what I'm doing is I'm connecting to a future self, and I'm using that information from the future self to decide how to bring my goal into reality, the same as an architect brings his building into reality. So these principles, number one, thoughts can become physically real. Time is a field. Number three, thinking is information moving through this field of time. And that memory is a connection, and a goal is a connection because they're both information moving through time. These principles answered my questions, which were, how is it possible to get information from the future in advance? And what I realized was everybody who is successful gets information from the future in advance. Now, one of the people on this call on Saturday was a friend of mine, Phil, who is a member of my online community. He turned 80 just recently, and he set himself a goal of running in a 10K race to celebrate his 80th birthday. So he had the idea first entered his mind as a kind of a what if, hey, wouldn't this be a neat idea to run in the annual Vancouver Sun Run to celebrate my 80th birthday? So this idea, when he decided to work towards it and achieve it, this became a goal. So this idea and this image that he might have had in his mind of seeing himself completing this 10K run to celebrate his 80th birthday he started working towards that. He started jogging. He joined a running club, went running on a regular basis, got some coaching, bought himself some running shoes, and over the next 10 months or so, built up his stamina and his body to the degree that he was able to actually run and finish this 10K race to celebrate his 80th birthday. So there's a perfect example of a person who had a thought, turned the thought into a goal by making a decision to do it, worked towards it, and then for his 80th birthday participated in the Vancouver 2024 Sun Run and completed his goal. So again, his thoughts became physically real. He had an idea of him running in this race. He worked towards it, and he achieved his goal. So using your mind as a kind of a time machine to think about your future as a connection that you can interact with. You can interact with your future self, in Phil's case, running the race, and saying, okay, what do I need to do to become this person? If I can see this future me running this race successfully, what would I need to do to accomplish that? And then realizing, well, I better start training. I better start working out. I better start jogging and running. That's what he did. So he created that reality for him, the same as an architect will create a reality of building a building, or the same as you or me can create my goal of going to the bread store and getting a loaf of bread. So these principles then is a new way, a new model of understanding how the mind works that gives us more personal power, gives us a way then that we can shape and mold our life so that we can bring more things that we want into our life and lead a more successful and a happier life by using our mind as a time machine. So, again, thoughts can become physically real. Time is a field. What we call thinking is information moving through this field of time. Number 5, memory is a connection. The mind works the same in the past and the future. Now, this principle that the mind works the same in the past and the future was actually scientifically proven in the mid-1990s. Scientists at Harvard University and the University of Toronto were working together to try and find where memories are located in the brain. Because at that point in time, 1995 approximately, the belief was that memories are a kind of a recording in the brain, and they were using something called a functional MRI to find where in the brain these memories are stored. Well, what they eventually realized is that memories are not in the brain, at least they don't exist in the brain in a place that they could find, and they also realized that what we call memory works in the future as well. When you look at a functional MRI of a person who's remembering something, or you look at the MRI of a person who's imagining something in the future, planning a dinner party, for example, what you realize is that it's exactly the same process. This is what the scientists realized in 1995. When we're thinking of the past, or when we're thinking of the future, the mind is doing exactly the same thing. So they call this future memory, and they coined the term mental time travel to explain this principle that the mind works equally well in the past and in the future. So memory is a connection, not a recording. Another principle is that all inner realities are equally real. Now, this is an idea that philosophers have debated for nearly 2,000 years. Going back to the 4th century, St. Augustine, who was a philosopher and a writer living in the 4th century, he was writing about time, and he said, both the past and the future exist in my mind, and they have a reality of sorts. So they're not physically real. My 10-year-old self is no longer physically real, and my future self is not yet physically real. And yet they do have a sort of reality, as St. Augustine said, because even though they're not physically real, they can provide me with information. So when I remember the past, I'm getting information from the past. If I remember a past that didn't actually happen, I get information from that parallel past just the same. The same as when Phil looks into the future and sees himself finishing that race. He can also look into the future and imagine himself not finishing the race, maybe running half of the race, getting tired and stopping. Or he can see himself standing on the sidelines as a spectator, watching the other people run the race, perhaps feeling like, oh, I wish I did that too, but I didn't train enough to be able to participate in the race. So there's all sorts of parallel possible future selves that we can think of in our imagination. And as principle number 7 and 8 state, the past is still there. It has a certain kind of reality to it, and the future is already there too. And principle number 9, my imagination is the connecting link between my present, my past, and my future. So my imagination is a connection, the same as my telephone is a connection. And principle number 16, my future self exists now and can be accessed and communicated with. So the way Phil communicated with his future self a year ago when he thought of running in the 2024 Vancouver Sun Run, it was in the summer of 2023, and he was in a sense communicating with that future self. And the information he got from the future self was something like, well, if you want to run in the Sun Run in 2024, you'd better start practicing, you better start exercising, you'd better build up your stamina. So you can interact with your future self, your best future self, because of course we have a whole range of possible futures each of us can experience. So principle number 10 then, a goal is a possible future reality that I can connect with now. When you realize that thinking is a connection, well, of course you can connect with the future self that has achieved your goal, the same as Phil achieved his goal of running in the Sun Run, which took place last weekend, in fact. So principle number 11 then says that each thought has a power to it which can be harnessed. Well, this gets right back to St. Augustine again, writing in the 4th century, that my thoughts have a kind of power to them. My inner world and my outer world reflect each other. In other words, that architect who visualizes the building in his mind, that exists only in his inner world. But if he persists and gets the building built, then his outer world reflects his inner world. And the same is true for Phil. His outer world now, the truth of his physical reality is that he ran in the 2024 Vancouver Sun Run, which used to be an idea in his inner world. So his inner world and his outer world are reflections of each other. And principle 13, changing my inner world changes my outer world too. And of course, it takes effort to do this because number one, if you're an architect, you need to think about that building you're going to build long enough to come up with plans to build it. It's going to take some weeks or some months or some years, perhaps, to achieve that goal. So over that period of time, your inner world is going to change. Your personality is going to change. Your thoughts are going to change. What used to seem impossible to you, perhaps, now seems possible. Principle number 14 says that the future influences and shapes both the past and the present. Well, in 2023, Phil imagined himself in 2024 finishing the Vancouver Sun Run, and that future possibility had an influence on him. Just the same as St. Augustine says, my future has a reality of sorts. Now, in quantum physics, they call this a virtual particle, because quantum physics describes the way particles appear in the physical world And they describe what they call a quantum wave function, which is a mathematical function that says there's a possibility that the particle is going to exist. And in some ways, you can't tell where it is until it appears. Well, this is true for us and our thinking and our goals and our ambitions too. If we see ourselves healthier in the future and we get the idea, well, I'd better cut out some things from my diet and I'd better start exercising a little more, that future image of ourself has the power to influence us to the degree that we will shape our behavior. The same as Phil's behavior was shaped and influenced by his goal of running in the Sun Run in 2024. So the present is not a product of the past, it's a product of both the past and the future. This is principle number 15. Now, in Newtonian mechanics, which was a description of the physical world, Newton said that the present is a product of the past. In other words, what happens in the past shapes the present. And so the present is the effect of the past. Well, what quantum physics says and what Einstein says is that the present is influenced by the past and the future, that you can determine what the present becomes by referencing the possible future. So these principles of quantum consciousness, even though they sound perhaps bizarre in the beginning, when you think about them, and I've been thinking about them now ever since I was 10 years old, when I had that dream of myself and I saw myself speaking and writing and lecturing and teaching people about how to live a happier and a more successful life. And in my early 30s, I began to do that. I began coaching people and lecturing, and I began making my living as a success coach and a seminar leader, teaching people these principles that I had evolved over the previous 20 years. Ideas that time is a field, thinking is information moving through this field of time, that the mind works the same in the past and in the future, that memory is a connection, not a recording. This explained to me how my dream could happen. Because this dream, and I'm sure you get the idea, I'm talking about this now, I've been talking about it ever since 1980 when I figured this out. So the idea that that dream was a real connection to my future that I picked up like a phone call from my future self when I was 10 years old. And when I was 32 years old and I was actually living that life, I was still connected to my 10-year-old. I could remember my 10-year-old self. I could remember having that dream. So these quantum consciousness principles, which are a combination of some ideas from neuro-linguistic programming, quantum physics, some positive thinking, self-help literature, some ideas from the philosophy of mind. These are ideas that physicists, scientists, philosophers have been thinking about and debating for thousands of years. 500 BC, approximately, the Buddha said, your world is made by your thoughts. Each of us makes our world by our thinking. So now physics is saying the same thing, that in some way, our thoughts influence the physical world. Our thoughts can become physically real. This is what a dream is. This is what a goal is. This is how your mind works in this four-dimensional field of time. You can imagine a whole range of possible pasts, possible presents, and possible futures. And when you understand these principles and you think about them, you meditate on them, you work with them, your thinking begins to change. And now scientists realize the second thing that they discovered with this functional MRI in 1995, they now call neuroplasticity. This is the idea that when you change your thinking, you change your brain. This was a mind-blowing concept when the scientists first realized this, because it was something that they thought was physically impossible. They believed that thinking was a product of the brain. So the idea that the brain is in some way a product or is influenced by our thinking, this was something that made no sense. But now they realize it's true because they have the physical proof. They have the MRI. They have the scientific evidence now that says, hey, it's possible to change your brain when you think in a certain way. And the certain way is what they call repetitive, focused attention. So when you focus your attention on something and you do it repeatedly over a period of days and weeks, the scientists can measure the changes that are taking place in your brain. And we can individually feel those changes happening inside us. The same as my friend Phil, when he first had the idea, maybe I can run in the 2024 Vancouver Sun Run to celebrate my 80th birthday. If you had asked him on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you believe you're going to be able to do this? He might have said, well, 7, 8, I'm not sure if I can do it. I'm not sure if I'm in good enough shape to do it. But over a period of weeks and months, as he started running and jogging and getting some coaching from a running coach and built up his stamina, then his belief became stronger. So as his emotions and feelings and thoughts changed, the scientists now say your brain changes in the same way. The same as you can build your muscles, you can build your brain. So in other words, you can become the person that you see in your mind's eye. When I was 10 years old, I had an image of myself at 32 making a living as a writer and a speaker. And when I got into my early 30s, that's what I was doing. I was making my living as a writer. I was coaching people and teaching people, and I was traveling around the country teaching people some of these principles of quantum consciousness. The idea that when you set a goal and you think about your goal, you are connecting to that possible future where the goal is real for you. And certainly Phil's goal became real. When I first thought of writing my book, it was just a dream, a fantasy. I didn't believe I had the ability to write the book, but I finished the book. And now the book's published, and it's helping people and changing people's lives all over the world. I have students now, I think, in 131 different countries reading my work. So your thoughts can become physically real. Time is a field. Thinking is information moving through this field. Your mind works the same in the past and in the future. Memory is a connection. It's not a recording like we used to think. All those inner realities have a certain reality to them, and they can affect you. You can connect with them. You can learn from the past, and you can learn from the future too. The past is still there. You can connect with it. You can learn new lessons from the past. The future is there too. You have a choice. Like Einstein said, the laws of time and the laws of space are mirror images of each other. So you can imagine information moving through time the same as information moves through space, like a phone call. I can phone my friend in Toronto, or I can phone a friend in Beijing, China. The information moves just the same from Toronto to my home in British Columbia, and from China to my home in British Columbia. The phone handles the information going east and west equally. And your mind does the same thing with information from the past or information from the future. So my imagination is the connecting link between the past, the present, and the future. My goal is a possible future reality that I can connect with right now, and I can learn how to create it. Each thought that I think has a certain kind of power to it, which can be harnessed and used. My inner world and my outer world reflect each other. And by changing my inner world, I begin the process of changing my outer world too. My imagined future influences and shapes the past, i.e., my present situation. So my present is influenced And Phil experienced his present being changed by the thought of him finishing this race, which he just finished last week. So his future idea, his future of a race finisher, shaped his present, shaped his decision, and led him to work out and exercise and prepare himself to run in the race, which he did last week. So the present is not a product of the past, as Newtonian mechanics says. It's a product of both the past and of the future. And your future self exists now and can be accessed and communicated with. So these are some of the principles of quantum consciousness that we talked about last Saturday on our community Q&A session. And because I messed up the recording, I didn't record that session, but I thought the information was valuable enough that I was led to put together this recording for you today. So I hope you enjoy this information and this summary of quantum consciousness principles. If you have any questions at all, please contact me through my website, mindtimeandpower.com. And please, we would love you to join us on these live Q&A calls, which have been taking place now every Saturday, starting in the first week of January 2022. So when my friend Jessica and I imagined doing these weekly live Q&A sessions, we imagined doing these calls, and with her help, we set these calls up, and we've been doing these live calls now for more than 2 years and posting these recordings on my YouTube channel. So you can find my YouTube channel. There's links to it in my website, mindtimeandpower.com, and we would love to have you join us and discuss some of these principles and start achieving some of your goals, some of your dreams, making your thoughts physically real in your life too. For more information about this online community, to get your own copy of the book upon which this entire training series is based, either the ebook, the paperback, or the audiobook, go to mindtimeandpower.com, where you can also get a free copy of this Design Your Life workbook.